Hello and welcome to the launch of issue 6 of the Alchemy Spoon, the fixed form issue. I'm Roger Bloor and I'm one of the editors of the Alchemy Spoon along with Vanessa Lampert and Mary Mulholland. We were really excited to receive such a wide range of poetic forms as submissions for this issue, some very familiar forms and some that we've not come across before, which was an interesting learning experience for us. Together with the poems, we have an interview with George Surtees by Mary Mulholland, and we have a personal view by Dr. Helen Eastman of Live Canon, together with a whole range of short and longer reviews of poetry collections and pamphlets. Our guest reader this issue is Michael LAVERS, who's contributed 2 linked sonnets for us. And I'm really pleased that Jack Underwood has agreed to do an introduction to this launch. Jack's a poet, writer and critic based in London. His debut collection of poems, Happiness, was published by Faber in 2015 and was winner of the Somerset Maugham Award. His works appeared in the Poetry Review, Poetry London, 5 Dials, New Statesman, The Observer, TLS, White Review, Tate, etc. He's collaborated with artists, composers and musicians, including work for radio and opera. And he's a senior lecturer in English and creative writing at Goldsmith College, University of London. So I'll hand over to Jack and then we'll hear from our poets. Jack Underwood.
Every word has form. Every letter has a shape and a sound that is a form. Where we situate a word or letter or mark a punctuation on the page, where we leave space between words, between lines, these are all formal decisions. Form is a weighing out, an act of measuring, of sound, in space and against meaning. The shape of the room we gather in, the cessations and pauses into which we sing, or the further grammatical system of space-time, of I-time, that we wager onto the page. Sometimes the weighing of form is undertaken with a predetermined shape in mind, like an algebraic expression ready for new values, for new variables to be substituted in. And they align themselves uniquely to the familiar shapes and measures. What other habitual shapes and measures do we experience as form? The distance you walk from the bedroom to the kitchen sink is formal. The resistance of the tap has form. The weight of the glass of water in your hand. You know these units of measurement. And it's no different for an iambic tetrameter followed by an iambic trimeter, or the way you feel a sonnet's tight turning circle, the way a sestina returns and withdraws its objects to the shoreline. But there are no extra poetry points for being strict about it. You don't love your cat because it weighs exactly 4 kilograms. Before the tradition, before formalism, the dynamism of established constraint and that long conversation with history, before then, you sat down on the floor unsteadily as a child and listened to the shapes of sentences arriving, the rising melody of a question, the sure footing of an imperative. You heard the way that a sentence like this one gathers up a form, a syntax like weight upon a scale, and accumulates its argument, seeming to hold it up in the air a little before the tipping point, after which comes the descent, the cows coming home, the episode in song returning now to the earth. You heard thousands of sentences before you even knew what a voice was. And that is also the material of poetry. That's the more fundamental music of language that we revise and re-articulate into meaning, into presence. I don't know. You arrange a poem in a certain space, and it sits there when you're done, looking relatively fixed and still, the way a cup ring records the event of its arrangement almost by accident, and you hope for some kind of reenactment of that event by the reader's charting of the particular arrangement. But none of it happens down there on the actual page, does it? The poem is all indoor work, in the throat, in the mind. In fact, it's worse than that. There's no formal anything in reality, no matter, just different forms of energy materializing into place according to our cognitive reference frame, the limited and particular evolution of the brain. Form is perceived into a state of coherence that is formal. Atoms materialize into place by their interaction. You can try and build a poem with an artisanal, objective sense of craft, whatever that might be, but the tabletop that you're tapping only exists in the hallucination of your consciousness. Your nervous interaction with the world is only the brain moderating a conversation with itself. Form is not set in stone or against a right-hand margin. Form is something you do, that you feel, a sensation in the mind that belongs to the category of experience. No rules, no extra points, no magic to the pattern necessarily. Form is just what it's like to be here, within language, which, if anything, gives form to us.
Our first poet is CAROLYN MACK. CAROLYN's a retired English teacher. She's now a grandmother, once a mother to sons, and having published a pamphlet of juvenile poems, she's writing and crafting with pens, paper and paints, imagined pictures of progeny to pass on to those now far away. CAROLYN MACK.
Ember days, rapscallion, candlestick flickers whithersoever wintertide, ere now stark eventide's gloaming last lunatic roams with lit candle wick ye countryside, or dark kirk spells death double quick. Tatterdemalion, homespun, rope bound and feared, fraught eyes and narrow, button willow his name, gleam of the gleed maniac, Jimson weeds, amaranth, bled till your bone, afterglow, he scaffolds the fro, sows pumpkin seed of almanac. Not but the dead, 5 pints of Aryan blood of barley alive, alchemize the like applejack, epiphanies on celestial field hither and yon, slither fellow, ratchet up the zodiac. It grows the vine, ramble, Blarneans, which hear ye, would by the iron stove, hot shudder in his last drops of when summer down day, Widdershin's weather departs ere keening easterlies. Banshee, which to the skeletal remains the gate, forefinned tall wraith of Widdicombe's fair, things said of old impose a tyranny of fate. The cost of unbelief was destruction, or rather spell me the world's woe and grief, omen unforetold, to tarry in the olden times, conjure periapt, horned demon to honor their demonic overbold pact, to release her from the pit, transparent her favored dress, long dark robes, a bane forbidden, to free her feral raven and cats, archetypal lunatic. Zealously he baits the mortal trap, hag-ridden, or dark kirk, spelt death, double quick.
Our next poet's Tom McLaughlin. Tom completed an MA in creative writing at the Royal Holloway and is now undertaking a practice-based PhD at Surrey. His pamphlet Open Houses was published in 2021 by Marvel Press, and his poems are featured in publications such as Funicular Magazine, Crossways, Porridge Magazine and Green Ink Press. Tom McLaughlin.
Trentissay for a bleak start to the new year. For several days I haven't left the house. Fascists stormed the capital last night. I spend the morning giving an online class, then go for a walk in the last of the afternoon light. I wish you quiet days and minimal pain, each child wrapped in glass, each love in cellophane. Fascists stormed the capital last night for the first time in 200 years. The jeers of voices contorted by hate and pale faces warped by their fears were heard and seen around the world within each lonely, locked household. I spend the morning giving an online class to a generation gripped by uncertainty, who need to feel other bodies close to connect to their invisible circuitry. I watch their courageous lives blossom in our protected online microcosm. I go for a walk in the last of the afternoon light through the privileged spaces of the common, as if traversing its bridal ways might summon back a spark that's been forgotten. The setting sun drags hope through the trees, kindling the sky by cold degrees. I wish you quiet days and minimal pain. I wish you weeks like origami boats that glide familiar streams again and again. I wish you months that open out like notes folded tightly by an unseen hand. I wish each year would be an ampersand. Each child wrapped in glass, each love in cellophane, is suspended in the moment of its bloom, which will eventually repeat as a refrain, spanning generations like an heirloom. The year's bitter lesson is one we must unlearn. Love and childish joy will both return.
Our next poet is Rahana Ismail. Rahana is a poet and a doctor from Kerala. Her poem has been featured or forthcoming in Nether Quarterly, Contemporary Hyben Online, Verse of Silence, The Aleppo Post, Pineco Review, and elsewhere. Rahana.
Conflagration. It happened in a flare, a dot to a knot to a woven vein, gathering sun and speed until the broom corner looked a giant papaya. Here prey and preyed upon, switching sides. I looked transfixed at the white center. My mother, fire in her eyes, fear in her island skins, scooping up the sleeping twin brothers. Suju scrambling under the bed for some things we always think of when it's time to leave. Grandmother scolding, holding her bamboo cane, molding her hands into thumbprints of a once ago farmer. We run out as pairs of eyes, each with a pool full of fire, as two lungs with banks of smoke. Sunset coughs into us as we stand below the banyan tree, changed in one blink, thinking of leaning onto its frail roots, each with what was salvaged from the being murdered house. Mother, the twins, Suju, his promise, folded neatly into a peacock feather. Granny, her cane, father, his hatchet, and as for me, as if walking away would save and spoil me in one stroke. Spring eclipse. My pet firefly burns to ash rings. Spring eclipse. My pet firefly burns to ash rings.
Our next poet is Connor SANSBY. Connor is poet, author, festival producer, and editor-in-chief for Whiskey and Beards Publishing. Since 2018, he's been reconnecting with his hometown and his relationships with the sea. His second collection, Where the Land Forgets Itself, is due for publication in early 2023. Connor SANSBY.
I've abandoned all pretense of thinking of the sea as beautiful. I wash seaweed from my body the way one would the touch of corpses. I fall in love with the complexity of a bubble, the balance of pressure and tension, I try to capture a bead of foam, the way one would drink from a stream with hungry hands and parched lips. I destroy the things I love, but the ocean is brass-bound and mean. The break of waves is not a love song or a siren call. Water is a thing of fractures, of splintered glass and thorns, bramble wave, wine-red sea of blood that kept Odysseus from home. I filter feed the water, strip it of poetry like baleen whales. I vomit salt. I cannot dream of swimming as a joyous act. I throw rocks at encroaching tides, so the sea will learn its place.
I'd now like to introduce Michael LAVERS. Michael's an American poet who very kindly has done the reading for this issue of the Alchemy Spoon with 2 linked sonnets. Michael LAVERS, the author of After Earth, published by the University of Tampa Press, together with his wife, the writer and artist Claire Ackerbrand, and their 2 children, he lives in Provo, Utah, and teaches at Brigham Young University. Michael LAVERS.
Hello, my name is Michael LAVERS, and this is my poem, 2 Children. It's actually a couple poems, 2 sonnets that I've enfolded into one. And the first one is A Son. War music, battering ram, aircraft carrier in idling hum, Greek chariot at speed, a sniper's scope drawing its bead across my white flag of surrender, hive of warmth and buzz and lofty plans, letting you in to where it's sweet unstung. Renoir, arthritic, tying brushes to his hands, the gong in Götterdämmerung. Laughter, summer, light, double refined, a wind thrashing the ripest cherries free. All Rome, but seen on foot, seen in a day. A sudden rain scaring the crowds away. Dusk steaming off a warm, blue marble sea. A camera flash of moon leaving me blind. And this is A Daughter. Long-awaited storm cloud, desert snow, a cloister fountain with a gold coin floor, the glint of azure trapped in iron ore, a murmuration high on vertigo, Arab coffee, plum-dark rum, my last, I promise, cigarette, spooling its strand of silky gray, a ship back from the land of spice, long purple seaweed in prismatic sway, salty, silty, scuffed, alluvial, the first A minor chord, scratchy in vinyl in late golden light, a Schubert lead. Ripe grain, chin high, outside Cordoba or Seville, but seen at night and from an old steam train. Venice in sun, Venice in fog, Venice in rain.
It's now my very great pleasure to introduce Neil Douglas. Neil's poems have appeared in Ambit, The North, Perverse, The Alchemy Spoon, as well as the NHS anthology These Are the Hands. He's worked as a GP and community paediatrician in London's East End and is currently studying for an MA in creative writing at Goldsmiths, University of London. Let's hear Neil's sonnet.
Borton's reflective framework is applied. What? Don Patterson, musician, poet, Scott, says that they make poems easier to write, suggests that they make lives easier to bear. What do I think? Well, 14 lines is not a lot. So do I pretend to be Shakespeare, set down this modest codpiece, or Captain Birdseye and net this enormous piece of cod, each battered every which way by love, death? So what? Maybe 14 lines is not a lot of da-da, 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 da-da. The tricksy rhyme, it blows both cold and hot. Now what? Okay, I think my lyrics on it. Committed now to wield my pen, ready then to do or die and write this effing sonnet.
Paul Stevenson's name will be familiar to anyone who visits poetry in Aldeburgh. He has published 3 pamphlets, Those People with Smith Doorstop, The Days That Followed Paris Happenstance, and Selfie with Water Lilies, Paper Swans Press. Paul also co-edited Magma issue 70 on Europe and co-curates poetry in Aldeburgh, living between Cambridge and Brussels. Looking forward to your Highburn, Paul.
Intentions. Autumn again. I've been thinking about Pennsylvania. The trees, the leaves, and your parents on the porch overlooking the yard. Like this time last year, when autumn came, and I got to thinking about Pennsylvania, its trees, their leaves, the technicolor, and your father and mother, together on a September morning on your porch overlooking the yard. When I say autumn, I mean fall. The sight of fall and the thought of it all those reds, oranges, yellows and pinks. How many falls since my first thoughts of going, since those ought to goes entered my head. Each year my thinking brightens, until the thoughts begin to brown, one by one start falling. You drove me, in their old Volvo, through the Appalachians, and in the Foster Joseph Sayers Reservoir we swam. We left the car, and in the darkening depths of Bald Eagle Forest got caught out, the 2 of us soaked against a trunk.
Heidi Beck emigrated to the UK from the US in 1998 and now lives in Bristol. She's worked as a tour guide, data analyst and assistant zookeeper. Recent poems have appeared in Rialto, Magma, Under the Radar, Butcher's Dog and online at The Friday Poem. Here's Heidi's Golden Shovel.
My poem, Pillaging the Poems of Others, begins with an epigraph from a poem by Billy Collins called The Poems of Others. It goes like this. As if only my poems had the right to exist, and people would come down from the hills in the evening to view them in rooms of white marble. And so my poem, Pillaging the Poems of Others. I planned to appropriate words with a golden shovel as I dug through the poems of others, wondering if here or there would be soil fertile enough for not only a pruned snippet, but also the demands of my unknown intentions. I discarded poems with long, peculiar phrases, or whose lines had become familiar, looking for an extract which I had the skill to graft to my words, and which I felt right about binding with mine, into a specimen which to others would seem so fused that it could only exist as one. My golden shovel could scrape and clash against its source, but also gild it, so people could see that I did not pillage, but paid tribute, as would anyone honoring a poet whose work has come to earlier fruition, sowing seeds and laying down the canon. It is true, I have not sought an opinion from Billy Collins about whether he would feel honored by the new shape of his words. He might send me back to the hills to dig again, try harder, create something more in keeping with the stature of a poet willing to remove the clothing of Emily Dickinson. Or tell me to spend the evening polishing spoons, not rummaging through his poetry museum to create my own, noting that tribute depends on point of view. Then he might groan at my shovel metaphors, consigning them to the garden shed. But then again, he might laugh and lead me into the museum. Or maybe mausoleum, he'd say, peering into rooms full of fragments of poems. See, don't sweat it, pointing at lines of archaeologists puzzling over words laid out on tablets of white. He'd wink, and we'd rush in, scattering paper and vellum and marble.
Margot Myers, a retired bookseller, lives in Oxford. She has a PhD on fairy tales, enjoys the surreal, the ironic, the unexpected, and writes in genres both light and dark. She's been widely published in magazines and anthologies, and her debut pamphlet is I Meant to Say, with Poets' House pamphlets. Let's hear Margot's sonnet.
Puppet. I found her in a skip. She could have been a dryad, her finely whittled limbs as sleek as if she'd morphed from flesh. Rethreaded, primped, alert, and stationed on the cabinet, she was my muse. A belladonna boldness in her eyes I loved, and how those painted lips drew secrets from a Cupid's bow. But then the wires of her joints grew rust. She slacked beneath the angle poise. Her pupils drained of light. Yesterday, the dangling jaw I blue-tack shut gaped wide again. Today, her arm fell off.
Dickon Bevington is a poet working in children's mental health. 3 years ago, he moved onto a rusty old narrowboat on East Anglia's river Great Ouse. Looking forward to hearing your ode, Dickon.
Ode on a barge stove. Cast in cold iron, first time I fired you up, on a chill April evening. Your back plate was broken, fuel scarce, and the must of the old damp boat, mixed with smoke and the sweet stench of river. I remembered joy. Then summer came, and fixing the shitter and scaffold planks for a table, rebuilding a galley, swapping rotten floorboards, gathered all attention. You lay cool until replated. Once lit, here was home. Since, you glow, raw, tick, November through April. Here's to hungry friends, Morso squirrel, the great barge stove, hurling slow heat out into winter through this vessel, renovated, rescued, just for you, you might think. Winter sees life on a narrow boat compress to your radius of warmth. The rest, bow and stern, accessible, but sea air cold, fetch trips only. All dwelling happens here. Hibernate or live in close-up. And if you think that our two warm bodies, yours harder, hotter, both a little rusty, 2 years in, have come to triangulate around a third, whose heat flows the length, who breathes out spring, I think you would grin.
JOAN MICHELSON's collections are The Family Kitchen, the Finishing Line Press, Landing Stage with SPM Publishers, and Bloomvale Home, Original Plus Books, and Towards the Heliopause, Poetric Matrix Press. Here's Joan's Tratina.
I'm Joan Michelson, and I'm going to read Inside the Heat Dome. Inside the Heat Dome. While the monks of Tassajara are fighting fires, I am tucked in deep with the mining bees, recalling the chants, the scents, the gentle heat, the cooling pool, the steaming springs, the heat that wooed, and now is changed to scorching fires raging through the willow forest. The bees alone know how to save themselves. The bees survive beneath the all-consuming heat to swim into the ashen aftermath of fires, fires fiercer than any the bees remember. The breeze, the willow forest red with fire, orange smoke that clouds the pool, and the bees who crave the moisture from the water. Bees! Bees! She shrieked, kicking up into the heat of a summer in a year before the fires. Fires with heat so fierce, the bees and I dive under.
Tom Day teaches English at Eton. He's published critical essays and reviews in Essays in Criticism, the Cambridge Quarterly, PN Review, the TLS, and others. He's had poems published in Agenda, Ink, Sweat and Tears, English in Education, and the Ekphrastic Review. Let's hear Tom's Curtal Sonnet.
Glass Scorpion. Be secret and exult. W.B. Yeats. You knew demotic graftings wouldn't win. The lightest of schemes, yes, yet the well-turned sentences, the tuning out, the Racine name, deft parodic voice, earned a hearing in my book. Imagine hordes of browsers mouthing like trout after the handcrafted fly downstream. Or some bygone master who burned with injustice, bristled with self-doubt, pledging himself to the price of fame. Imagine.
Julian Bishop is a former runner-up in the Ginkgo Prize, and his first collection, We Saw It All Happen, comes out in 2023 from Fly on the Wall Press. He's also had poems recently in Magma's Anthropocene issue, The Morning Star, and XR's Rebel Talk. Here's Julian.
Highlights of mining for gold in Indonesia. Look inside your lovely rings, gold chains are piercing. They become a jungle when buffed. Beneath the luster, watch two men with chainsaws appear from a clearing. Your eyes settle on an orangutan, a tapanuli grooming her golden fur in the sun, one of only 800 living inside our lovely rings, gold chains are piercing. Under the smoky canopy, she spends her days feasting on mangosteen, golden-fleshed durian, rattan liana, until the two men with chainsaws set to work clearing. Tapanuli carries on, unaware her infrequent offspring are popular pets in Taiwan. She eyes the new predators, living inside our lovely rings, gold chains are piercing. She's quiet thunder and lumber, a gold vein threading together diminishing jungle, but an inconvenient gorilla to the two men with chainsaws. They work on, clearing until all the mangosteens, durian and liana are nothing but stumps, part of an ambitious sustainability agenda. Look inside the long gold chain, listen to the piercing chainsaw, see how smoke rises from the clearing.
LEAH LARWOOD has an MA in creative writing and is widely published and placed, including in Dyslexia, Poetry News and the Poetry Society's Stanza competition. She is a writer for UK magazines, including Dyslexia. She is seeking publication of her debut collection and training to be a Gestalt psychotherapist. Here's Leah.
So This poem is inspired by a verse by Hafiz and is also dedicated to Charlie Morley, who first introduced me to the Jungian concept of the golden shadow. Golden shadow. When you are lonely in the darkness of night, diving into rain clouds with chalk in your eyes, if only you knew your astonishing light. While the wind seems to know when all is not right, in your head there's a jackdaw telling you lies. When you are lonely in the darkness of night. Like the acorn in awe of oak's noble height, you can't weather hope, only yearn to be wise. If only you knew your astonishing light. You even burn silk, talk the sun into fight. Shadow, why are you too brilliant a prize? When you are lonely in the darkness of night. You cling to an envy of lotus in white. Step out of the magic you try to disguise. If only you knew your astonishing light. When you feel happy spinning fast in flight, I wish I could show you the dazzling skies. When you are lonely in the darkness of night, if only you knew your astonishing light.
Anne Simons began writing poetry in 2015 after a career teaching deaf children and adults. Her work has been widely published, including in Orbis, Obsessed with Pipework, Ekphrastic Review, and Poetry Salzburg. She has an MA in writing poetry from Newcastle University. Here's Anne.
Stealing the seventh wave. Everyone knows they're best. 6 little waves meander and crisscross, confused. The seventh has power. Swells from the deep, tips and runs with confidence. That's what I wanted. I nicked a few others, tricked cat's paws off the surfers, tried white horses where sea breaks to foam, leaned over and caught them in a bucket. Then, for the big one, I climbed over rocks, crouched by dark water, beach bag open. It nearly had me, crashed and snatched, put up a vicious fight, but I got it in the end. Now it rests in a bath in my garden shed. I've never seen a surface so dead.
Our next poet is Thea Smiley. Thea is a poet and playwright from Suffolk. Her poetry has been shortlisted for the Bridport Prize and other competitions. In the past year, she's been published in Spelt, Street Cake, Obsessed with Pipework, and the Offie Press. Here's Thea.
Writing. From the very first line, you can see that I am trying to stay upright, to balance myself and not upset this fragile craft. From this craft, I stare out at the curved line of the horizon, watching for a wave which could upset the equilibrium and tip me into the sea, forcing me to right myself. I keep an eye on the danger zone, between the hull and boom, while I check that the crew are clear of the craft before I climb onto the daggerboard and try to right the vessel by hoisting myself upwards, ensuring that no rope or line is tangled around me, as I use my weight to see if I can make it lean far enough, careful to offset the weight of the wet sail to reset myself on the surface. If I can manage it, I am fit to cross this roaming sea. If I can trust the strength of my craft, I will follow my line of sight as far as I dare, knowing I will be all right. If I can write, set line after line faithfully on a page, then I can craft my days, my life, and oversee myself as I venture off across a sea of paper like a shipwright, testing a craft for the first time, setting out with a tight heart and a keen eye on the disappearing coastline. But we'll see. Only if I am dead set on reaching that bright point on the horizon will I write the words that I hope will keep this craft afloat. This is my lifeline.
Ilse Pedler won the Dyslexia competition in 2015. Her first collection, Auscultation, was published by Seren in 2021. She lives in Cumbria and works part-time as a veterinary surgeon. Here's Ilse.
A few things I'd like to say to Sister Letitia about the 2 years you taught us at the convent. Bitter bride of Christ with your beads and Bible, did you believe you could convert us with your coercive cant, your divisive dogma? Desperate to drive out our sin with each evangelical enunciation, from the tight fight of your lips to your eyes with their fervent fury, you searched our faces for any trace of godlessness. Grasping with bony fingers the yoke of your crucifix, hands hidden in the secret creases of your habit. Invoking images of hellfire and damnation, squeezing the joy jealously from our infant bodies, as under your will we were kept kneeling on the stone floor of the convent chapel. We learnt your loveless litanies of dear Lords and Hail Marys, Mother of Gods, as you made us pray for salvation, noiselessly narrowing in on any naive slip of the tongue, pausing by Maria, the only orphan at the school, as her sin was the greatest. Then, with practised precision, dragging the day's persecuted to the front and inquiring quietly with vindictive ritual which penance we required, rosary or the ruler. Suffer, little children, and oh, we did. Our supplications scorned self-righteously until you considered our sacrifices sufficient, then trembling before your perverted theology, we unprotected, unpitied innocents were allowed to kiss your hand. We voiceless victims learned our lessons well: vigilance, the wickedness woven into authority, the whisper of black cloth on stone. Was your exacting X-ray focused subjugation of our tender 4 years your yardstick of exaltation? Did you, I wonder, in your zero-tolerant zealotry, ever find your Zion?
Sue Burge is a freelance creative writing mentor and editor based in Norfolk. Her poetry collections are In the Kingdom of Shadows, Confetti Dancers and Lumiere, and The Saltwater Diaries. Here's Sue.
Hi everybody, I'm going to read my ghazal. Renée Vivien composes a ghazal for Violet Shillito. Renée Vivien was a British poet who wrote in French at the beginning of the 20th century, and she was in love with her childhood friend, Violet Shillito. Violet unfortunately died very young from typhoid fever before their relationship was consummated. Renée Vivien composes a ghazal for Violet Shillito. I knew at first sight you were the colour of all my heartbeats, violet. I wept in woodlands as thoughtless heels crushed modest violets. When I think of you, Sappho's words fly from my pen like thousands of urgent migrating birds. For you were my delicious air, violet. I didn't realise dying was an art until I tried and failed, needed years of practice to find your darling, dead, delirious face, ma violette. How can I write poems without mentioning these humble flowers, regal robes, fresh bruises, or the colour of dawn, which is, of course, violet? When I finally master the trickiest of arts, I am ready with my dying wish. So here lies Renée Vivien, heart-stilled at last, under a posy of violets. Thank you.
Well, sadly, that brings us to the end of the launch. I need to thank all of the poets who've contributed by reading tonight, and all the poets who have poems within the issue, and all of those who submitted to the issue. Sadly, we weren't able to include them all. And also thanks to Jack Underwood for the introduction to this evening. You can buy copies of issue 6 from Clayhanger Press. The website address is on the screen now. And you can check out details of our next issue, issue 7, which has the theme of space. And you can check that out on the Alchemy Spoon website. The address for that's on the screen now. So, once again, thank you very much for attending, and good night from us here at the Alchemy Spoon. Good night.